Hello, this is Julius from Basic Financials. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about hire purchase contracts, lease agreements, and maybe just buying something without either of those. The most common situation, I suppose, where you might come across this and get introduced to it is buying a car. Now, if you have money in your bank, and you don't need it for anything, then you've been trying to find some sort of home for it with a good rate of interest, which is not very easy to do because there's not much interest out there at the moment for savers. But if you're in that situation, which would be nice, and you want to buy a car, use that money to buy the car. Don't go out and get a loan, because your loan rate is likely to be more than you're saving that money, the interest on that savings. Don't get a hire purchase agreement, because again the interest is almost certainly going to be more than the rate of interest on the savings. Sometimes they'll say there's no interest, but you do need to look carefully at how much they're actually selling you the product for, or the car, because it might be no interest on the agreement, but if they're charging you £2,000 extra over 3 years on the price of the car, well, that's interest, really, isn't it? And if you've got the money, don't go out and lease the car. Now let's assume that you don't have the money, but you really need the car. Maybe you've got a new job that you need to get to work for. If you can't pay it outright, then the next thing might be to do a hire purchase agreement. Now, with a hire purchase agreement, they normally ask you to pay a deposit up front, and then you'll pay a certain amount over the next maybe 3 years, sometimes 4 years, and it will be a fixed amount each month. You don't own the vehicle until your final repayment, but once you've made your final repayment, that's it, and you own the car, and then you can go and do what you want with it. You can sell it, you can keep it running for another 5 years, probably the best thing, if it's doing you well, or that's it really. Now the other form of having a car is to do a lease. Now there are a whole bunch of different types of leases out there, and they've all got different names. But you have to be really careful about leases, because what they're really, or to me, seem to be set up to do, is to enable people to use a car that they can't, maybe is a little bit more expensive than they might, or a lot more expensive sometimes than they should really be doing, and it can get you into problems if you enter into a lease for a car for 3 years that is too expensive for you, and you might lose your job, for example. You're still in that lease agreement, then you could have problems. Now with the lease agreement, you don't own that car. It's like a rent, really, and you'll be paying a certain amount each month. You probably have got a certain amount of miles you're allowed to do in that car, and if you go over that number of miles, then that will cost you quite heavily. Sometimes there are maintenance agreements as well that you can add to it, so you can agree to pay something each month to have them service your car, and then you don't have any extra bills. The one good thing is you know what the costs are going to be, but it can be quite expensive. Now, you also want to be very careful of the lease agreements that end up with a balloon payment at the end. So it's a little bit like the hire purchase contract where you pay your deposit at the beginning. With the lease agreement with the balloon payment at the end, they often call it a lease purchase agreement, I think, you end up paying the big deposit at the end. Now, that can be okay if the value of the car is the same or more than that balloon payment. But if the value of the car is less than that, then you might have problems. And the reason for them doing it is because one of the options is not to pay the balloon payment and to take out a new lease agreement for another car. And you can see straight away that they've got you hooked. Um, it's okay. It's just expensive, and it's all right to do it. But so long as you know what you're getting into, you're likely to be always be paying a little bit more than you might have done if you'd bought a car, used it for 4 or 5 years, um, and got the more than that, 10 years if you can, and got the best use of that car and the money you paid for it. If you know you're going to be changing your car every 3 years because you like the new car, then fine, go into the lease agreement. But it's expensive, and they will tie you in. If there's any chance that you might lose your job or lose your source of income, then it's probably something you shouldn't be doing. And be careful not to go a little bit higher than you might have otherwise have done. We have a better class of car, one that you can't really afford. Just try and stay within your means. That's a little bit on hire purchase agreements, but the one thing to bear in mind there is if you've got money, don't enter into those agreements. Just buy the vehicle straight if you've got the money spare. Okay, I think that's probably all on that. If you found that useful, like and subscribe as usual, and thanks for listening.